Hello, this is Eric Sapanik. The year is 2020 and the date is 9/11. 19 years ago, the U.S. had the attack in New York to the Twin Towers, and ever since then, the world's never been quite the same. But we have with us Damian White, who has an extraordinary story because he was actually there that day and about as close to ground zero as you could have been without being in the actual towers. So, Damian, thank you for doing this for me. I appreciate that. And if you could just kind of take us down, I mean, that morning when you woke up, how'd your day go, and how did it lead to the point where those planes hit the tower?
Yeah, well, I mean, the fateful day, I guess it started out kind of as a normal day. Getting ready for work, watching the business news on CNBC, and a plane had hit the tower. I just got out of the shower, getting ready. Initially, they thought it was no one really knew. They thought it was a small Cessna, a small engine plane. So it hits the plane or the tower, and at that time, I said, okay, well, I got it. I worked directly from, I worked at an address called 33 Maiden Lane, which is actually about a block and a half from the World Trade Towers. And so I was going down to work. It was a normal business day. But as we got closer down there, we saw the second plane hit. And then at that point, everything got pretty surreal because, I'm sure everyone's seen the videos of the mass panic of people pouring out of the streets and the plumes of smoke. But I remember standing with my friend, and in New York, obviously, especially in Manhattan, in the lower district, everything is tall buildings, 60, 70, 80 stories, and the trade towers would stick out 20, 30 stories above them. But when you're looking up at them, it's a major landmark, and then you see one of them disappear out of the skyline. And so I turned to my friend, Arthur at the time, and I said, did the tower just fall down? Did it just collapse? And it was like you couldn't really visualize, you couldn't really accept what was happening in your vision. And so then at that point, it just, it snowballed into complete and utter chaos at that point. But we were a little more adventurous or trying to figure out what really happened. So we actually...
Let me stop you. Would you say like you were kind of in shock at the time when that happened? Or when you said it was like, what was that feeling like when that first one came down and you were questioning what you were seeing? Did you feel like you were in a dream, or what exactly was it like?
It wasn't really shock at that point. But it was just a moment of disbelief. Yeah, where your eyes are tricking, you're trying to process what's going on. I mean, it's one of the most world-renowned, buildings on the planet, and it just fell down before your eyes. So it was kind of like I don't know, was it an illusion? Was it real? But it was utter chaos everywhere. People screaming. Some people have covered in blood, and there's ash and stuff, and that those plumes. The famous are the plumes of dust and asbestos, and it's not. It looks more like smoke, but it wasn't really smoke. Concrete, pulverized, and so yeah. I mean, and then it just, like I said, it snowballed so fast from that point, where we were down on ground zero. You could hear. This was before cell phone. Well, not before cell phones, but no one really used it. So when the towers came down, that was all the communication, basically for everyone's cell phones back then. Pagers were big. And all the television towers. So the live feed of 9/11 was all coming from CNBC, that was splitting their live feed out to all the stations around the country. And we happened to be standing right next to the anchor that was doing the reporting. And so we got kind of cordoned in with her, hot in ground zero.
So you were outside when the actual first tower got hit. Were you on your way to work at that time? So you were on your way to work. How far away from, you say, your work door were you before that first one hit?
The first one I was at home getting ready, and that's when we left, and I left and went down, and we were probably a half a dozen blocks away when the second one hit. And so where I worked, there was all different vantage points. I have friends that were, you know, directly down in the plaza when the plane hit, so that's where the glass was showering down on them. I had another friend who I worked with that was actually in the office when the tower collapsed, and no one knew at that point really what was going on. I remember standing on the street, you could very low visibility, cars exploding, and you hear somebody, like you couldn't get a signal on your cell phones. You couldn't call anybody. You couldn't call home or tell your family that you're safe or communicate in any way. I remember hearing this guy across the street had a sports pager, and he screams, you know, they just got the Pentagon. And then he says, Philadelphia just got hit.
Wow.
And so no one knew what was going on, but at that point you knew it was a full-fledged attack. You know, people are wondering if San Francisco, all the major cities are going to, you know, kind of go down at that point. I remember my friend telling me that when the building collapsed, they thought it was a nuclear bomb. And so he stood up in front of his office window because you could see everything coming down, and he thought it was just going to be like a Terminator type explosion, just wipes out everything. So he just stood there to, you know, accept his demise, and then it just kind of tinkled on the window. So you can get these different stories from different vantage points.
Did you have that plume cloud hit you when you were outside?
I was a little farther away. I mean, the plume, we could see it coming, but it kind of dissipated, and that's when you saw all the people coming out. And we kept going in to see kind of, you know, what the heck was going on. But then at that point, you see, I mean, ambulances were coming out of the dust, had no orientation of where they were. And so we were directing ambulances actually over to the Hudson Yards, where they were setting up a triage facility for the victims, or the survivors, I should say.
So at this point in time, the towers are down. Where are you? After both had fallen, the dust had settled, where are you at this point in time?
2.5 to 3 blocks away from the actual collapse of the buildings. And you got to understand, when it happened, I mean, you couldn't see your hand in front of your face because of the dust and the debris. But yeah, cars were exploding. There were fires everywhere. And then at that point, I wasn't the only one there. There weren't a lot of people, but the police pulled up and were pushing people back. And that's when, and you'll see the car futures trading. I caught a piece of paper out of the air, you know, smoldering and burning. And when I had that, I showed it to the lady the reporter at CNBC, and she goes, "These two guys are with me, and they cordoned us in, and they knocked everybody out." And then at that point, that's when CNBC fed the news to nationwide. And so that's when my mom realized that I wasn't dead, or, you know.
Because she saw you on TV.
Yeah, she saw us on TV.
Must have been a very big time of relief for her at that point in time.
Yeah, well, actually, there was no cell phone signals at all. I was with Arthur. We were crouched behind this car because there was all these explosions, and my cell phone rings, and it's my sister. And she's like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, kind of," you know, right. And you could hear explosions, and so it was a short conversation, but kind of the communication came through real quick, and then that was it.
So later that night, take me after the day, you know, the sun sets at this point in time. Where are you at this point in time?
The city went on full lockdown, so no one was allowed to enter or leave the island. All the bridges, all the tunnels, everything was shut down. And basically, you know, most people would get together, a dozen friends, or you know, and sit in someone's apartment and talk and drink beers and watch the news, and because it was so surreal and mind-numbing. Yeah, everyone was trying to get, you know, just like the rest of the country, we've just been under an enormous terrorist attack. We never had that before, you know, and you could just see, you know, downtown burning, and the towers were gone, which was a landmark. So it was a really, you know, odd visuals.
A very big landmark at that.
Yeah.
And one of the most significant landmarks in our country. So, yeah, I could imagine what that was like. So the next day, And this is where we're going to run some pictures so that people can see what you were able to actually see the very next day. And these pictures are the ones that I find to be just beyond extraordinary, because I never seen anything quite like it from all the different interviews that I saw. And I mean, you really got down to that area and did some things that, you know, you probably weren't supposed to be doing, but your curiosity got the best of you and you went down there. So tell me a little bit about that. How did you get down there, first of all?
Well, yeah, we weren't really supposed to do it, but yeah, curiosity and to see what really was happening at the time. And there was still so much chaos going on that there wasn't a lot of structure. I mean, there was emergency responders from all different outfits. Of, you know, the military hadn't been brought in yet at that time, and so my girlfriend at the time was a medical student at Columbia University. So she had all these credentials. So what we ended up doing, some people probably would get mad at me for doing this. You know, there were a lot of people that were killed during that time, but what we did was we put on hospital scrubs. We had hospital IDs, and we went down and were allowed through the restriction zone, which was basically 14th Street. You could not go south of 14th Street, Union Square Station. And so, yeah, in some of these pictures, you'll see like ground zero 24 hours after the whole episode happened. And it was, again, I hate to use the word surreal, but it really was in that type of a scenario, whereas, you know, you don't see that kind of stuff in Manhattan, where it's just a dead zone, totally quiet. Normally thousands of people and cars, and you know, there's a fire smoldering with countless bodies. You know, and that's what made it very toxic, was all the asbestos in the buildings and the electrical and furniture, and you could just smell. It was a really vile smell that, you know, you would eventually develop like a gag reflex to it, because it burned for months. It did. But yeah, we saw some pretty amazing stuff. Pictures that probably a lot of people hadn't seen. I mean, we were walking a half a block from the actual destruction.
That's just so crazy to think that you were walking down there at that time. What the camera you were using, was it like a disposable camera, or what was it?
So yeah, we were not allowed to be there. And so yeah, a disposable camera in the back of my scrubs, and wind it in your pocket and take some shots, you know, kind of covertly, because immediately after, the baton was passed to the FBI. So it wasn't police tape, it was FBI crime scene investigation. So there was, you know, federal officers all over the place. So yeah, it was.
So when you decided to leave that zone, what kind of led to that, and how'd you get out of there?
You had to walk out. There was nothing you could do.
Okay.
There's no cars, no anything. You just had to huff it. I mean, at that point, there was probably a couple inches or more in certain areas of the plume, of the dust. I mean, it blew out and settled all over the entire area. Mm-hmm. Cars were just destroyed, countless cars. And there's pictures of that as well that will. But yeah, I mean, for a while it was a rescue operation. You know, and I knew a lot of firefighters that had, you know, lost their actual brothers or all the brothers in their firehouse. And I mean, people were there for 12, 18 hours a day, every day for a month and a half. A month at least for a rescue mission, and eventually it got turned into a recovery mission. Mm-hmm. Just because it was, but the hope was there, and you know, it's really hard to see that with all the you know, because those first responders are like brothers, and you know, it was some pretty devastating. You know, you'd have whole firehouses that were wiped out.
Okay, last question. How would you describe how that event changed your mindset and your life from there on forward? Well,
It's tough to say. I mean, we moved out of the city shortly after that, within about a year, because New York was always at a threat level red. SWAT team were there, National Guard were there. It's just not it wasn't a great place to live anymore. In regards to how it changed me, I mean, I will say that a few years later, handful of years later, when the Boston bombings, the Boston Marathon bombing happened, I remember watching that on the news, and it was just a relentless coverage for 48 hours. It was a manhunt. And I started getting these weird sensations. I don't want to call it post-traumatic stress disorder or anything like that, but at that point I was like, that's it. I just didn't want to watch the news. It was just all this over coverage of it. And so I think that kind of, like, I don't watch that stuff anymore.
Do you dream about this from time to time?
No, I don't. But, you know, I also know a lot of people that were closer than me to the action. You know, I lived with somebody for a period of time that his office was on the 87th floor of Tower 2, I want to say. And when the plane hit, the wing of the plane went into their kitchen and exploded it. They were the last floor to make it out alive. Everything above them burned. And so there's some people, like I could never, some people got affected a lot more than me. You know, that's why I never felt comfortable taking the government assistance. There was FEMA camped out there when people started going back to the work, and they were giving out money like crazy. I mean, almost like our, you know, so I never felt comfortable taking that because I wasn't, you know, I didn't even actually know anybody firsthand, like very close to me, that was killed. I know a lot of people that did. I mean, you could really see that, and it went for months and months, parks and you know, everyone putting out pictures and candles of their loved ones. I'm talking, you know, thousands, whole parks. So you really had to take a step back and see, you know, how much it really affected me directly. And I was there. It was very intense, but it affected so many other people on a much greater scale.
I think it's very big of you to say that is the way that was. That, you know, it did affect other people on a much greater level. Well, I won't ask you any more questions at this point in time. Is there anything you'd want to tell your son about this by chance? If you were telling him about this, what would you tell him?
I mean, that's where he's from. He was born in those times. Mm-hmm. I mean, 9/11 created like a mini baby boom, mm-hmm. kind of like World War II. You know, we were locked up in New York City for 2 or 3 weeks, not doing, all you were doing was at home. You couldn't go to work, you couldn't eat, restaurants were closed, couldn't go in, couldn't go out. There were a whole bunch of babies were born around those times. But he's gonna, you know, I don't know what to say in regards to that. It's such a surreal time. You know, kids nowadays are confronted with something completely different. Mm-hmm. You know, they have their own pandemic to deal with at this time.
Well, I think this was a very interesting interview for me, at least that is. I hope other people think as well. But I definitely think this is something that deserves a little bit of a timestamp and also a reflection. How do you feel about next year being 20 years from the date? Does it feel like 20 years?
Goes by quick. I actually didn't really think about it until earlier this week when I realized, wow, 9/11's coming up again, and then yeah, we're in year 19. So 20 years, and you know, a lot has changed. It changed the world forever, like you said. I mean, just us. Just the Patriot Act changed our lives.
Oh, absolutely. The way we fly. I mean, everything. Mm-hmm. I mean, everything was different after that day. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate you doing this.
Thank you.
And maybe we'll recap this next year when we do hit the 20-year mark.
Sounds good.